use it.
I have them.
Yeah.
I'll just go ahead and then tell us the story, and then what he can all cut out what they don't want and where I mess up.
Right, well,
Yeah,
and sometimes, you know, we want it to be natural because
Yeah.
we want to preserve the history. So whatever you want to start with,
okay.
and you can,
You ready to start then? Okay. Well, the Tate family came to America in about in the 1740s. Stephen Tate came from Belfast, Ireland, and he came with a lot of Scotch-Irish and people from Scotland that were supporters of William of Orange, and they wound up in West Virginia in the mountains, and then the locals called them hillbillies, and that's where the name hillbillies came from. And Stephen Tate went into Kentucky with Daniel Boone, and we always thought it was our Stephen Tate, but wound up there was two, so we don't know whether it was him. But Stephen Tate didn't come back from Kentucky, and our Stephen Tate died young, and he left two sons. Then the Tate family expanded in Kentucky in that area, and then moved into southern Illinois. And during the Civil War, the Tate family, there was 11 boys, and we've traced where 6 of them fought for the Union, and no record of the other 5. And we know they had a big disturbance over the Civil War, and we're pretty sure they fought for the South. My great-grandfather, he moved to Kansas, which was a free state, and my grandfather was a butcher in southeast Kansas, and he married, my great-grandmother was Martha Jefferson, and we always thought she was descended from Thomas Jefferson, but she wasn't. She was descendant of Thomas Jefferson's uncle, and so, then she married a Canoose, and my grandmother was a Canoose, and he was German, and then they had my grandmother and grandfather had a number of boys, 7 boys. The oldest was James, and then Lincoln, so you know what side they were on, and then Ad, and then my dad, and then George, and Arthur, and then my grandfather died real young and left him young, and then about 3 years after my grandfather died, Uncle Harold was born. So Uncle Ad came out, and he wound up in driving hearse in Portland, and then how he wound up in the Ruby Valley, we've never figured that one out. And he was working at the Larrabee Ranch where they trained trotting horses, and when my dad was about 18 in 1910, he brought my dad out here, and my dad went to work. He has a training trotting horses in. And he worked with the 2-year-old colts, and in those days, the way these big ranches built up their property was they got young people like my dad to take out homesteads, and they designated where to take them out, and then my dad worked full-time there while taking out his homestead, and then the agreement was when he got title to it, he sold it back to them. But the World War I came along, and he went to the war. And when he came back from the war, the ranch had been sold because the cars had put the trotting horses out of business. And then my dad had a homestead he was given title to when he came back, that he didn't have to sell back to them. And then he traded that for our ranch up at Clear Creek, 3 miles above the ranch here. And there he started ranching. He started in the sheep business, and that 21, and his homestead cabin, he traded his homestead. He traded to the lady that owns our property here, and so she immediately tore down his cabin and used the logs to build the cabin here. So his logs are in our cabin here, and then. In 23, my mother came out to teach school, and the Marshall Ranch, they had 2 daughters, and their Conways up by Poison Creek had a daughter, Blanche, and those were her 3 students. Blanche stayed with the Marshalls, and my mother stayed with the Marshalls. My dad had a bunkhouse, and he had no hired men, so they converted that to schoolhouse, and they walked a 1/4 mile up every day for school. And of course, a 1.5 years later, my mother and dad were married then. And my mother's family, my grandfather, his brother, was with the rebellion in Ireland around Dublin, and the English, they were fighting the English, and they were going to hang him. And so the priest, who was his uncle, got him and 2 other fellows on a ship, got them out, and they came to Helmville, Montana. And he took up homestead there, and then he brought my grandfather and 2 sisters all out to Helmville. And they all took up homesteads, but my grandfather didn't care much for the farming and that, and he went to work in the mines in Butte. And my grandmother came from Dublin, and she was living in Butte, and they met and got married in Butte. And then, not Dublin, Galway. She came from Galway. And then he got miner's consumption. He couldn't work in the mines. And by that time, my great uncle, who'd been the outlaw, wound up, he was the sheriff in Deer Lodge. And he got with the prison ward, and cars were just starting, and they needed roads built. My grandfather took a crew of prisoners, and they built roads through all the rough rocky areas, because he was good with dynamite and drilling and all his experience in the mines. And so they built the first road between Bozeman and Livingston through the canyon. They built along by Gold Creek, I know they worked, and they built that, and then they built the first road around the east side of Flathead Lake. Yeah. And then my mother grew up, her first grade class, when she's in first grade, she went to school halfway up the Bozeman Hill. There's a little community there, and that's where she did first grade. Then after that, my mother and she had a younger brother, 2 years younger. My grandmother, they had a house in Butte, so they stayed in Butte then. Then when my mother, she went to college in Dillon, and it was a 1-year course to become a teacher at that time, and then she came up to here to teach, and then they were married, and then we raised sheep, and my dad built up a small herd at first, and in the early days, they couldn't afford to eat meat, sheep. They lived on deer. My dad had 12-month-a-year hunting season, and got whatever he needed, he went out and took. And he's made a lot of his living trapping coyotes and selling hides and that. And as they got bigger, then the marshals and a Con Reader, who was just above the canyon, the three of them had their sheep together, and they ran their sheep up on the pole patch for a number of years. And then when my dad got a bigger band of sheep, they went, he got his own allotment up on Standard Creek behind Black Butte. And they ran their sheep up there. And, can you wait a minute now? Running out of wind. After my mom, when they lived up at Clear Creek at Upper Ruby, they figured on being snowed in up there from Thanksgiving to St. Patrick's Day. And my dad, later on when he did get a car, they left the car down here at the ranch here, and they took, and he had a little corral with hay in it, and if necessary, he'd come out with a team and sled, and would have a car to get to town if he had to, but most generally they never had to. And things I remember, every Saturday night, there was about 5 or 6 families up above there, and they'd all get together and play cards. My dad would throw hay on the sled, hook up the team, and we'd all go, and as a little kid, all I remember, it was ice cream and cake and that, but they would, every Saturday night, the whole neighborhood would get together. And, but in 1938, my oldest sister was old enough for high school, and she'd been taught, the Faith Marshall taught the school there, was the girl my mother taught first, and then they had a cabin up on Warm Spring Creek, just near the mouth of Warm Spring Creek. As an old miner's cabin, they converted that to school, and my 3 sisters went there until my oldest sister got out of the 8th grade. And then my mother, 38, my grandmother died in Butte, and my mother had their home in Butte, so she went to Butte with the 3 girls, and they went to school there. In 38 and 39, I was able to stay with my dad at the ranch, and we'd go out, and he always let me drive the team. But I know the only reason he let me drive the team because he was sitting right by me if I got in trouble, because then he could roll his Bull Durham cigarettes. And we go out and he'd have to go out and feed in the morning, and then and they had to get the wood out. They'd bring the wood out from the mountains. They'd go in the fall and cut firewood, and then they leave it lay for a year, and then next year they would go out and bring in what they cut down the year before, and bring that in. So they'd have to go out, and all the neighbors went together, and they all brought in their firewood together. And I remember when we went out, all I remember is my dad telling me, "You stay by that fire and don't you leave." Because one time I heard this howl, and I asked my dad what it was. He told me that was a wolf. I don't know if it was or not, but that kept me close to the fire, and where I wouldn't get in trouble. But I know when in 1940 I had to go to 1st grade, and I had to go to Butte, and that was the worst thing I ever have faced, leaving the ranch.
Bill, you didn't say how many children your mom and dad had, and what their names are. Maybe they'd like to know.
Oh, yeah. Well, my oldest sister was born, Frances, was born in 24. Jane was born in 26. And Ree was born in 28. And then I was born in 34, so it was a kind of a gap there. And then when they went to school in Butte, my mother, before they went in the early 30s, she got a washing machine, a Maytag washing machine. And my mother grew up, and when she remembered in high school being at a high school assembly to hear the first radio. And she went to, she saw Man on the Moon, and she went through her whole life, all the changes. She said the greatest invention there ever was a Maytag washing machine. That changed her whole life. When she got rid of the washboard, it was the biggest thing that ever happened. That old Maytag washing machine had a one-cylinder gas motor on it with a foot pedal you had to stomp on to start it. And nobody knew how to run a motor then. It was the first motor, and so they used to have quite a time getting it going. But it was the greatest thing she ever had. And when my youngest sister, she was in 4th grade when she went to Butte, and they started school in Butte, and she told the nun at the school that her mother made butter in the washing machine. And my mother and sister and her went round and round, because and then my mother, when she went to the school thing, she explained, oh yes, I do, but they had a stainless steel cylinder. You took the agitator out of the washing machine, put the cylinder in and started up, and it churned about between 3 and 4 gallons of butter at a time. It did a big churn for us. And that was part of our income, was selling cream and butter. Parker was born in 38, and Tom was born in 40. And they, of course, they never stayed up here until just in the summertime then. My mother would go back and forth. She had an old Pontiac, 38 Pontiac, and she'd come out whenever she could. And when the weather was good enough, we'd come up for a weekend or that, but most of the time my dad would come to Butte for Christmas, and he'd have somebody feed for him so he could be in Butte at Christmas time. But if the weather was good, we would come up, but most of the time we were in Butte during the winter. And then she got a 41 Oldsmobile, and after that, then she'd go back and forth, haul us kids back and forth. She'd load up the 6 of us, and she'd head for the ranch, and Sunday afternoon we'd head back, and me and my 2 brothers be in the back seat, and if we got to acting up, she would stop the car, all 3 would come out, all 3 would get a licking, all 3 go back. She didn't waste any time figuring out who was doing what. And my dad never did really get to change from driving a team to driving a vehicle. He could, but he wasn't too good at it, and he knew it. And he had my mother, whenever the driving was tough, my mother did all the driving. Mud, snow, ice, he turned the driving over to her. And this road wasn't very good in those days, and she would navigate it through. When my dad came to work and with the trotting horse, the buggy horses, there was about 6 ranches in this area one was by Deer Lodge at Racetrack, and that's how the town got its name, and then the Round Barn down by Twin Bridges, and Belmont up Sweetwater, and the Ruby Dell Ranch just by Alder, and then Larrabee Ranch up here, and they would ship out carloads of trotting horses every year. And they would take the those horses when they were 6 months old. They weaned them, and each horse had their own private stall in the barn with a little area to move around outside. And they would take the closest they ever got to another horse was nose over a fence. And those horses were hand groomed and hand fed every day. And by the time they were shipped out, those horses were more comfortable around people than there were other horses. So in town and the buggy horses, things go wrong, excited. The horses were comfortable with people, and they could use them that way. And then, of course, they all had racetracks, and they did race some of their best ones in buggy horse races. And then Spokane, who won 2 of the Triple Crown races, was trained at the Round Barn in Twin Bridges. And that was one of the first racehorses came out of Montana. Most of the ranches here were raised sheep and cattle, but sheep were the predominant. They had sheep all the way, all through the valley here, and they ran. And before the Forest Service came in the early days, the cattlemen and the sheepmen divided the upper Ruby into, the cattlemen took the lower part and across the gravelly and that, the sheepmen took the high country. And an interesting thing was, the rules were, the last band of sheep that came off of the Forest Service, or it wasn't Forest Service then, first it came off, were to set everything on fire as they came off. And that burned off all the weeds and the trash, and it went across, and there was no ladder fuel left. And that it didn't go up into the trees. And then when they came back in the spring, everything was fresh and green, kept all the sagebrush and the weeds out, and it was so good until the Forest Service came in and messed everything up and wouldn't allow it.
And you remember as a kid, you used to get money for something with the sheep shearers?
Oh.
You used to get some.
Oh, the shearing, the sheep shearers came through, and they were like the combiners on the grain. They'd start Texas and move north, and to shear the sheep, and they came in. They had the whole plant. They'd set up platforms and building with a roof on it, and there was a canvas roof, and they would set up for about 6 or 8 shearers. And they had a long shaft that went the full length of the shearing area with and a motor to run it. I think it was an old gas motor, and they turned that shaft, and off of that shaft there was little cables like the old dentist drills used to run, and that would run the shears. And each shearer had his little spot, I'm guessing about 5 foot by 5 foot, where he sheared the sheep, and behind him on one side you had to fill the pins with sheep to be sheared, and there was a burlap hanging down so the sheep wouldn't come past it, and then on the other side there was another pin with burlap hanging down, and the sheep shearer would reach in, grab a leg, pull the sheep out, shear the sheep, and then push him under the burlap on the other side. And then you would have to, on that side, we'd have to brand them and doctor any nicks the shearers put in them. We had old dauber with medicine on it, and like we had a red tea was our brand, and it was paint, and you had to dip that. And as a kid, I did a lot of that. By the end of the day, you were as red as a sheep, brand. But that was, and then each shear, they used paper string to tie the fleeces up, and there was a tire, and he'd bundle up the fleece that the shearer sheared and tie it, and then they'd take them out, and they had a big platform, and it was about 8 foot or a little better high, and it was in a big ring in the center of it, and they had a metal ring, and they'd pull the sheep's wool sacks over that, and then they'd fill it. And the wool sacks were about 8 foot long. And they would make a few baskets in to throw a few fleeces down, and then the stomper, he'd jump down in there, and he keeps stomping that down. And tires, they keep making baskets on top of his head until he worked himself clear up to the top of the sack. And that guy was so slick and greasy from all the lanolin from the wool by the end of the day. And but then they'd raise the sack up, and he'd sew it shut, and then they'd tip it over, and then he'd put another sack in. And these sacks were just wide, long enough, they'd fit crossways in a boxcar. And so then after they were done shearing, up where we were, up on Cottonwood Creek, where we had our spring pasture, and Uncle Ad was there, but the Andersons and the Williams, we had about 6 or 8 different bands of sheep. They'd take them about 2 days to do a band of sheep, 1,200 ewes, and then one band would move out and the next one would come in. And my big money making was I used to take all the shearers' water bags, and I'd go up above the like say, get above the herd and fill the water bags in the creek, and then bring them back down. And I used to get $0.25 apiece for that, and that was big money those days. And then during the war, when everything was rationed, my mother got to be king of the black market. She could trade because, like on sugar and coffee, the sheep herders would come, and they never have their ration coupons, and for the coffee, and they would, and a sheep herder would go to prison if he abandoned the sheep. But he'd tell my dad when he come up, he said, next time you come, you either bring sugar and coffee or bring a man. So our whole allotment would go to the sheep herder, and we wouldn't have anything. And so my mother learned to trade butter and meat and anything she could on the black market for gas, and back and forth from Butte. She kept us in the things we needed here at the ranch that were rationed, that you couldn't get through with dealing with people. You would get a lot of the coupon book, that certain coupons for certain things. And once you used up your coupons, you couldn't buy any more of that. And so you would trade coupons. It got to be quite a thing, trading coupons, or even buying coupons from someone. And just to get your supplies, things were so short during the war. Gas and sugar and coffee were 3 of the real hard ones to come by.
The winters had to be pretty difficult. During the winters, how would you get vegetables or fruit, or I'm assuming Grandma did a lot of canning prior to going into the winters?
Oh yeah, she'd buy peaches and pears and grapes and she'd make jelly and they used to buy them by the bushel, and that was a big thing in the fall, canning, and she did a lot of canning and that for the winter, and then in the early days when they were here, my dad, in the fall when it was about time, just before freeze up, he'd buy about 10 to 15 pigs ready to butcher. And then during the winter, he'd butcher them, and then through the winter, he'd cure the hams and the bacons, and they'd make the sausage, and they render the lard, and actually use everything. He even made head cheese. And they would take the sausage and they'd fry the sausage and put it in a crock. Well, there's these big crocks, and then they pour a layer of sausage and a little layer of lard over it, and then another layer, and they'd fill the crock plumb full of sausage. And then over this whole summer, you could keep that right in the pantry. It would never spoil. And you dig down in the lard, bring it out, and it was all, and fry off the lard, and you had your sausage. I know the cholesterol, that must have been pretty good, but it was awful good sausage. And then my dad, we hung all the hams and the bacons and that up in the root cellar. And as a kid, my mother used to give me a little pan of vinegar, and she'd tell me what she wanted, and I'd go up and get a ham or a bacon, and there would be about 2 inches of mold all over the cheesecloth on it, and I had to wash it off because she didn't want the hired man to see me coming down with that, looking like that. So I had to wash it off before I brought it down. And we had, of course, we had no electricity, outdoor plumbing. We had a pump in the house, but we had a spring box, and the water in the spring is down under the hill, was ice cold. And we took my dad had it was about 3 foot square and had a 12-inch board all around, about 4 inches below the surface. And my mother would put all the stuff she wanted cool in gallon jars. And we would run, before the meals, we'd have to run down and get them and run back, take them back down and keep them in that, but they were kept in that spring box, and that was our refrigerator. And then we put up ice in the winter. In the winter, my dad put up ice. We had an ice house, and they'd cover it with sawdust. And then my job as a kid would go run down and uncover the ice, and then they'd come down and get a piece out, and then I'd have covered back, the rest of it back up. And then as you got towards August, then the pieces, blocks got smaller. A lot of times, by that time, I could pack them up. But one of the big things we had was ice cream. We had to churn. That was another job I had. The girls would cook up the ice cream, and then I had the old crank, and I would have to make the ice cream outside before supper for the hired men. And in the early days, when they first started, my dad, we didn't have anything. They lived on deer meat. My dad couldn't afford to butcher a sheep or that, and so he would take. My mother got so tired of cooking deer, she said she'd just sit down and cry sometimes. And one time, the forest ranger came by, and in those days, of course he was on a horse, you never let somebody go by without letting them eat. And here it was way out of season, and all she had was deer meat. So she said, she gave him the deer meat, and when he got done, when he left, he says, "Mrs. Tate, you cooked the best mutton I ever ate."
When you were living here, Dad, in the winters, I mean, that always fascinates me, how tough people had to be, because you couldn't get down.
No.
What happened, like, if there was a medical, if somebody got sick, or how would that be handled?
The only one on that, when my dad talked about, and go back a little bit on that, when my dad was in the Marines, he had wounded twice, and he had to stay in France, and he worked in hospital. They took the soldiers and Marines that were mobile enough and made them take care of the other soldiers, and so he got to be quite a good nurse, and then he took care of most when the problems got like that. He took care of us kids, and that he knew how to do things. But my oldest sister, Frances, she went into Butte for the first grade, and they didn't have a school up there because she was the only student, and she got scarlet fever and brought it back, and then the other two girls had scarlet fever, and my dad had the doctor came up and he went up to the ranch, but he said, I can't take care of these girls here, we've got to take them to town. And he went down to Sheridan, and nobody would take them in because of the scarlet fever, except the lady that ran the hotel, and she was one of the ladies of the night, and she was the only one who took care of them.
And did Grandpa then stay with the...
He had to stay at the ranch, and my mom, she was down there in the hotel with all the girls.
Uh-huh.
And,
Right.
and
a lot of people died from scarlet fever.
oh yes, my sister Jane, she had a bad heart the rest of her life, and Ree didn't hear good. She had bad hearing because of that
Because of scarlet.
fever. Yeah.
You talked about Grandma seeing a lot in her lifetime, from 2 world wars to the Great Depression to being a widow with 3 young boys, and doing the black market. So Grandma's seen a lot in her lifetime, and she was born in what year, Dad?
02.
1902. And then 1919, I believe, women could vote.
Yeah.
So Grandma could have been one of the first women in America to be able to vote at 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
To be able to.
She
vote.
did.
Yeah.
She was one of the first ladies.
And she told you that story,
Yes.
didn't she, Mom?
Yes.
What did she tell you about
That-
being able to vote?
That she was one of the first ones when they could vote, that she could vote, was able to vote.
And was she proud of that?
She was very proud of that. Yes. And,
I think Grandma and you, she would tell you a lot of stories because you would drive back and forth, and you would spend a lot of time with
well,
her.
I couldn't come up to the ranch, and when I was pregnant, and so then Dad and Tony, my brother, would come up to the ranch, and then I'd stay at Grandma's, or Grandma would come out and stay with me, and they would, your dad would take you, and I was pregnant with Joe, and then she would tell me a lot of things, so, and we became very close.
She was a strong woman.
Pardon?
She was a strong woman.
Very strong woman. She had to raise 3 young outlaws.
Yeah. Yeah. How did they keep the livestock fed during the winter? Were you responsible for helping with that? What
Well-
did they do with all the horses during the winter time?
Well, up here, you couldn't afford to feed horses in the winter. hay was so precious, you had to have that for your sheep and cattle. And my dad would keep in the team and the good saddle horses. And all the rest were turned loose to run wild in the hills with the wild horses. And then just before haying season, Billy Marshall herded the cattle up on the forest, and he would watch where the bunch of wild horses were. And then the group of ranchers, they would go out and they'd bring them in. And they would run the horses in and they'd bring them into our corral, round corral. And you could not have one piece of cloth outside on the line, nobody in sight. We could only peek out the side of the window. We weren't even allowed to stand in front of the windows in the house. And because one thing would blow them horses, you'd lose them. So they'd run them in the round corral. And then they would rope the old workhorses from the year before. Hopefully they got them back, and each rancher would take those home. And then if they wanted to break some, they need a new workhorse, they'd look around the bunch and they would say, well, that looks like it'll make a good workhorse. And so they'd rope them, and then it had a big post in the center of the corral, and they'd start them running around the post. And as they ran around, they unwound the rope, and the horse kept going around, and the guy kept going around until the horse came up to the post, and until he was choked down. And then when he passed out and hit the ground, they run in quick, release the rope, get a halter and a rope on him, and put a trip rope on his front feet. And then when he came to, he'd jump back and he'd pull back on that rope, and he still caught. Most generally, those horses would never pull back on a rope again. Of course, there was always some that would never quit, but there was a lot of them would never pull back again. And then they'd start leading them to water, and for about 2 weeks, they'd lead him to water, and if he didn't lead to water, he didn't get to drink. And he went back and forth, and of course, if he acted up, they had a trip rope, and they'd drop him to his knees. And by the end of a couple of weeks, then they'd harness him up, and they'd put him on a mowing machine, which was the hardest thing in the hayfield to pull. And they put him on with a big, gentle horse. And of course, with a trip rope, if something, they could keep dropping him if they wanted to. And then they'd work him all day long, and they'd change gentle horses at noon. So, and after a couple, 3 weeks, they were working out. But needless to say, working and using horses like that, we had lots of runaways, lots of wrecks. Things didn't work always the way they should have worked.
Did Grandpa ever own a motorized tractor?
We got a little farmall tractor right after the war, but didn't know really how to use it. We did figure out, he did have put a mowing machine on it, and then and they used it to drive the derrick, but which pulled the hay stacker up. And my mother could run that. But in the hayfield, during the war, we had so you couldn't get people. And my sister was just older than me. She worked in the field, and my mother and my 2 oldest sisters, they did the cooking and the housekeeping, and then I helped my mother in the hayfield, and she was driving the derrick with the team to and she hated horses, and she had more trouble with the horses. And so she had to go to a funeral, and when I was 8 years old, and my dad says, you can drive it. And so that morning I started driving it. When my mom come back, she'd lost her job. And she was so happy. And then she was my helper. I had been her helper cleaning up around the haystack and that, and then she was my helper. We cleaned up around the haystack, And so from then on, I got to drive the team. And you drive it out and back it up, and the horses had to go out so far and then stop. And every once in a while, they'd stop one step or so too soon, and the hay would fall down in front of the stack. And then my mother and I'd have to clean it out. And then when next time out, my dad had let out a hauler from the top of the stack at the horses, and they'd go out and hit the end of it hard. They'd throw the hay off the back of the stack. And so we were cleaning up behind the stack next time. But my dad always did all the stacking, because that was the hardest job in the field. That was...
And everything was by hand.
Everything by hand. And it had the big sweep rakes went out and brought the hay into the stackyard. And then after my mother started use the tractor to do that job, to run this, then I started running the sweep rake, and that my sister always ran the dump rake to rake the hay, and but she loved it, and but one time her team ran away from her, and they ran out and into the swamp, and when my dad and I got there, the horses were out buried up to their belly in the mud, and they couldn't go anywhere. And so we had to walk out on the tongue of the rake and get the rake unhooked from them, and then we pulled the rake back with another team away from them. And then my dad and I had to reach underneath the horses and get a chain around the horse's belly, and then pull the horse out with another team. By the time we were done, we were all mud left under there trying to get. When we got the first horse out, that left an opening and more room, and then the other horse we were able to get out a lot easier, because there was kind of an opening there where the first horse came out of. And
did Ree lose her seat when they started sinking? Or?
Well, she fell off out in the fields, but she was lucky going. She went off over backwards. You didn't want to fall under the teeth of the rake. There was a number of people who were killed with runaways. They'd fall under the teeth and get drug underneath it there. But I was raking, and I'd been mowing, and with my team, and we were caught up, and I was raking to help her, and I had my mowing team, and when you're mowing, every time you get a little mouse nest or something in the teeth, you say, "Whoa," back, and the horses stop automatically. Just when you say "whoa," they back up, and because you got to clean the teeth of the sickle, and I was raking with them, and I was sitting on the seat, and I fell asleep and fell under the teeth, and I was underneath, and I hollered, "Whoa," and here come their biggest problem I was, they were backing up. They had to get away from their feet, backing up towards me. But if I would had a wild team that would have run away, I would have been in trouble. But my team did just what they'd been doing when they were mowing. They backed up, and I was able to get back out from underneath.
You talk about Grandma seen a lot in 100 years. You're 90 now, and you've seen a lot in 90 years from doing work in the fields with a team of horses. How old do you think you were when you drove your first team?
Oh, my dad started me when I was 4, but I was driving, but I don't know if I was really driving. I was driving as long as everything went well, and I didn't have to turn them or do something with them. But
maybe we should back up a little bit and talk about the current property that we're on and how Grandpa acquired it and who lived. What was the name of the lady that lived here at that time?
The lady that lived here was Agnes Garrison. She was a sister to my Aunt Molly Tate, and she was anything but honest. And her Aunt Molly was nothing but honest. But when my mother came up here, first came up, that's the first place she stopped. And in 23, the cabin was brand new then. And she says, first thing Agnes did when she drove up, Agnes ran out and grabbed a chicken, wrung its neck, and come in, and they had chicken for supper. And but my dad told a story about Agnes that before that, every time he come by, she was out chopping wood. And so one day he had all kinds of time to help her, so he went out and chopped a whole bunch of wood so she wouldn't have to, and he went on up on the saddle horse. He was going down somewhere, and when he came back by, all the wood was gone, and she was chopping wood again. So when we took over the cabin, she still had wood up in the attic. So she would hide the wood, and then every time she seen a man coming by on a horse, she'd run out and stop and start chopping wood. So the guy would stop and help her chop wood.
And then how did Grandpa acquire this piece of property?
Well, and with all her scheming and everything, she lost this to the Virginia City Bank. And then when the Depression hit, the Virginia City Bank went broke. And my dad had been leasing it after she lost it to them for a couple, 3 years. He'd been leasing it to them, and then from them. And then when they went broke, they offered him. He was able to pick it up at a good price. But like my dad and everybody in the Depression at that time, he just borrowed the money from the other bank to pay that. And in those days, if you could pay the interest, you didn't have to pay any on the principal. The bankers, times were so tough, if they could just get their interest paid, they were satisfied. And so it took my dad, he bought what is the Timber Creek Ranch now. He bought that in 26, and he bought this one somewhere around 31 or 32, and he didn't get title to them until clear into the 40s, because things were so tough them days that the bankers just, if you could pay the interest, that was it.
This land holds a lot of natural treasures. People come here and the land makes them feel good. The land gives people value to themselves, but the land also was home to Native Americans.
Yeah, there was the Shoshone Indians used this as a campground, a small amount of them. Most of the Shoshone were over in Beaver Head and the Shoshone, but the Ruby here wouldn't support that many, but this was an excellent place for them to camp, hunt, and cure their meat with this wind that blows here every night and the good water. It was a perfect place to cure your meat and that. And we found lots of chippings where they made arrowheads there, and that here, and a couple arrowheads, but mostly chippings where they camped here and that. And there's a couple other campgrounds in here, and there's teepee rings, different places in the valley. But the Shoshone, mainly, they like to summer into Idaho and that, and they like to winter in the Beaverhead from Dillon down to Twin Bridges in that area. And that's the first place that there was first white man that spent the winter here was Dempsey.
Yeah.
Bob Dempsey. He, in 1851 and 2, he spent the winter on the Ruby, about 2 miles up from where it runs into the Beaverhead. And that was the first white man that spent the winter here. Now, Jim Bridger traveled back and forth, and a lot of times the Shoshone, going back and forth, they like to travel through the Ruby, and they call it which was the stinking water at that time. And they would go from, they come up and down, they go out into the Three Forks area to kill buffalo and get back out before the Blackfoot caught up with them. And the Marc Pierce did the same thing. And they would come down from the Big Hole area, across from Idaho, and they'd go down out to the Three Forks in that area where the big herds of buffalo were, and they would catch, and then they would take go back into before the Blackfoot caught them, and that's what happened to Sacagawea. She was caught by the Blackfeet, and as a little girl, and then traded to the Mandan Indians, and that's where Lewis and Clark, they got her, the man that she was married to, and her, and she guided them back through here.
So this was such an ideal place for the Native Americans to camp, because every morning and evening the wind would come through to help dry their meat.
Mm-hmm.
But can you tell us about the water source in the spring that's on this property?
Well, the spring, it's an excellent spring. It's good, really good water. And in the early days during Prohibition, all the bootleggers used to come here to get their water to make their booze with. And it's called, so they named it Moonshine Springs. And but the quality of the water is excellent. Well, when I first started, there was this old timer here that told me, he said, there's some reason all these springs are coming out up there. He says, I don't know if you do very well drilling a well. And so I developed the spring, and I had to hire an engineer, and I had so much trouble with the state getting permission to use surface water, that developing the spring, but with an engineer we finally got permission. And I always wondered if I'd done the right thing until Cassie drilled her well, and she only got a very small amount of water. But because there's a rock wall, a barrier comes clear across through the valley, right between the house here and the spring. And the water above, there's good water above the spring and very little below.
And then when did Grandpa pass away?
In '49.
All right.
And he paid for the electricity to come in '48, and he died in January '49, and the electricity came in after he was gone. He never saw the electricity up here. And we still had outdoor plumbing, everything up here.
So money was not something that came easy.
No, they
had to work extremely hard just to make a living,
Yeah.
let alone have extra income for anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh yeah, things were tough. They were very short on money. We never went hungry. I always had food, but money that was hard to come by.
When Grandpa passed away, everybody told Grandma she needed to sell property.
Mm-hmm.
So she did sell some property.
She sold the main part of the ranch. Yeah. My dad and Uncle Ad and everybody told her to sell this place. and she didn't do it. She wanted to save it for us boys. But I've been thinking that God has a plan for everything. And it's a long-range plan. It isn't just a short plan. And that's why she saved it.
I agree with that.
And then we came along, and we're a small part of the plan. But you can see all the good Cassie's doing now. And that's where we're going towards.
Well, we always felt something special and connecting and almost healing to this land. In growing up here, I never realized the importance until we had guests come in and tell us how darn lucky and blessed we really are. And I believe that we're such a small part of the plan, just like you do, but and if we can work hard to keep this, I think the unknown plan, or maybe the plan Grandma knew, but she absolutely refused to give this up. And if anybody in my life, Grandma needed the money.
Oh, yes.
Grandma was determined, so she worked hard. She saved the land using her willingness and how hard she worked, and so she kept the land. Everybody, her brother Bill was an accountant. I think he thought she was half nuts, and with many-
Uncle Ad and everybody.
And they said a woman with 3 young boys has no business owning property in the Upper Ruby. And so she went to Butte, and she rented out the houses that Grandma had. How did Grandma make money after Grandpa died?
Well, she had those houses. Well, my grandmother had 4 little houses that she rented out, and then my mother took over renting those little houses, and she didn't get that much money for them. Rent, I think she got like $30 a month rent on the houses, and but then she went to work cleaning as a maid cleaning the schools.
So she kept the land in the family, and then she divided it between you and your 2 brothers. And
Well, she gave it to us together.
together. And then over the years now, you became that sole owner, but you and Mom put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into the land, and right now it's 280 acres. Correct? Is that
88, yeah. Okay, well, my dad always dreamed about picking the rocks off of the valley, off of this ranch, making a hayfield out of it. But at that time, there was not the equipment or anything, and so I tackled it, and through a lot of work between the 2 of us and everybody else, and that we got it done and turned them into hayfields. And I don't know if it ever could be done again, but if it's ever turned over, it's going to have to be done some again.
For future generations, there's a comment by Uncle Parker that will give a great idea how bad this land was for grass. Please tell us that one.
Oh, he used, my brother used to say, a grasshopper had to pack a lunch to get across here.
And your mom worked, Mom, do you remember picking rocks out of this field?
Oh, yes. Lots of rocks. And you guys helped. And Joe was 4 years old. And my friend and her kids and I stayed up here, and we picked rocks, and Joe drove the tractor, and I jumped on when it came to an irrigation ditch and got him across. And then a small wagon full of rocks day after day, and then your dad got a bigger box, and when he retired, and we picked rocks. And this field where Cassie lives, I crawled out because my back gave out, and I said, I'm never gonna pick another rock.
But you have.
I have, but then your dad bought a rock picker and a rock rake. And then we got a dump truck. And as he went along, you have to be perfectly straight with him. If he stopped too soon, it went over the top and the windshield was cracked, and I'd lay on the seat.
Because the rocks were raining down and you thought you'd get hit by rocks?
Oh yes, they were just like hail, but bigger.
I remember when Donna was little, Tony and I, when Bernice was pregnant with Joe, Tony and I were building a feed rack right where the store is over here now, and we could feed that stock when we weren't here. And there wasn't any fences out here, and we had a bunch of steers out there, and about 8 or 10 head. And Donna was 4 years old, and she had a little red coat, and she'd go out, her and the dog, and she had a stick. And every once in a while, she'd get close enough to hit one of them steers. She used to follow them all around the hill. We could look down the field, see that little red coat going around. She was out all by herself and just had a great time chasing them steers around. And one night, well, we were in an old cabin. She, of course, had to go out to the bathroom, and I can go by myself. I don't need anybody. She's very determined. She'd go outside, and one night she comes screaming. Daddy, Daddy, come quick, Daddy. And Tony and I go, what's the matter, what's the matter? And it was a real dark night. She looked, the sky is beautiful.
Well, you've installed a love for the outdoors in both Joe and I. And we both love hunting. Some of our best memories were out in the hills, playing hide and seek on horseback. So not only did Grandma and Grandpa work extremely hard, and money was difficult, you and Dad worked extremely hard. And I know growing up, we never went hungry and we never went without. But we never traveled a lot. We went to North Dakota to see your mom and Dad, but we had fabulous childhood.
Oh, yeah, really best rock pickers, huh?
I went and hurried up and got a job when I turned 16, so I didn't have to pick rocks anymore.
But we used to come out here every weekend and work, and then go back on Sunday.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, Dad, when you got out of the service and you guys started coming up here, you weren't married to Mom yet. Tell us about how you got rid of all the flies and all that. I love this story.
Oh, well, that was even before, we would come up, us guys, and this was a place to come drink beer and party and go fishing and hunting, and it was a good place. And there were so many flies in that and mice in the cabin. Me and a friend of mine, Bob Kahn, we I went into a hardware store, and in those old days, you could buy cyanide. And I bought some cyanide, and we put 3 buckets in the old cabin, and we put the cyanide in little paper bags. And we had signs already on the doors, and we left the doors wide open. And we took and dropped a bag in each of the buckets. And then we ran out. And when we got up to the gate and we looked back, yellow smoke was coming out of every crack and every crevice of the whole cabin. And we left it there for 3 weeks, and then we aired it all out, and we went back in, started using the cabin, and we would sit, when we were sitting there, the flies would come in the door, they'd fly and they'd make it about halfway across the room and hit the floor. And we were staying in there.
That's a good story.
And we never had for about 3 or 4 years, we never had a mouse or a fly in that place.
And you guys were in there smoking and drinking beer.
Right.
How did you and Mom meet?
Well, Bernice, do you want to tell? I'll let you do some talking.
I had 2 brothers in Butte, and one of my brother's wife was going to have a baby, and so I came out for 2 weeks. And now it's 66 years later, and I'm still here. Too bad. So my other brother was going with your dad's friend. She was a good friend of your dad's. And so we had ladies' night out. We went and ate. And then we went next door to the bar, and that's how I met your dad. He asked me to dance, and he hated to dance, but he danced. And so that's how we met.
Did you ever teach him to be a good dancer?
No. No. I told my mom, I'm not going to marry a farmer or a rancher, or I'm going to marry a guy that really knows how to dance. I failed.
No, you didn't, but you sure learned how to pick rocks. You worked hard. Well, not only was Dad dedicated to saving the land, so were you. You did an awful lot to make sure it was safe for Joe and I and our children and their children.
And I hope and pray that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-grandchildren will someday appreciate the land like you and Joe and your dad have. And that they'll always has to stay in the family. And so, and each one will be able to do something, like Cassie, and someday Kaiden will appreciate all the hard work and his children, which we'll never get to meet, but I'll see them.
Right. And I think Missy and Kelsey and
Yes.
Hannah, all of them, and Will, all of them have a love and appreciation for the land and also want to help preserve it.
Yeah.
And each one cares for it their own way.
Yeah.
I think never forgetting that it was a gift. It wasn't just, it was a gift to the family, to stay in the family. And that gift did not come easy by past generations.
Yeah. They'll appreciate it, I hope. something.
Can I cut it?
That's,
I gotta go.
Potty break?
Yeah.
So can you tell us how you ended up starting the business
okay.
that's currently here on the ranch today?
Okay. Then, well, in '84, I was 50 years old. And I had no retirement. The company I worked for had been sold a number of times, and I'd lost all my retirement. So all I had was my Social Security, and I thought, well, if I get a couple of trailer houses, maybe I can rent them out to the hunters and a little something to add to my Social Security. And then the first year that I had 2 trailer houses, we rented them out a couple times, didn't do much with them. And then in '85, we moved them from about by the old cabin down where the cabins are now. And we got 2 more trailers. And they were old mobile homes that were very reasonable, we got. And we rented those out. And then '86, we were able to build the A-frame on. And each thing, we started out, we had no money to start with. I kept working in Butte, and we...
Missoula.
Or in Missoula, excuse me. Yeah, we worked in Missoula and drive back and forth and kept building, adding on, and each thing, the trailers paid for the A-frame, and then the A-frame, after about 4 years, then we started the lodge, and the A-frame and the trailers paid for the lodge, and we just had, with basically nothing, we just kept building. And I worked for our living, and the rest went into to building this. And then I wasn't doing anything with the summer, and I had Donna. I told her if she could do something with the summer, she could try. And she's turned it into a tremendous business. And she took it from there and really went with it. And everything was built from there on.
What did you start up doing, and how did you come up with the idea to even start out, and how did you advertise that first?
Well, I started out, I took it out, ad in Outdoor Life and Field and Stream, and I got an 800 number, and the first year I was the only one in the magazine that had an 800 number. And that got me calls from everybody. It got us started. Of course, the next year, everybody had an 800 number, but I had that 1 year a head start, and it made a tremendous difference, got us started. And from then on, the business gradually grew, and to the point that it was soon, we had more repeat business than new business. The hunters came, and we offered them a place to stay. They had to do their own cooking, bring their own food, take care of themselves. We could retrieve their game. I wasn't an outfitter, but I did have a permit to haul out their game. And so we could retrieve their game, and but they all hunted on their own. And then later on, when Donna got the outfitter's license, then she could do so much more with the...
You know, it was much more than just getting an ad in Outdoor Life. I mean, you hauled the trailers up, and Mom would stay in the old cabin in September, and the archery hunters would come, and then you would clean the trailers, and then your friends would come.
Well, all my friends, we would never had anything here if it wasn't for all my friends. They came up and helped with everything, and when I was working in Missoula, they were here in hunting season. They took care of the customers. They cleaned and did the maid work and everything in the trailers, and just to help me out. They were retired, and then when we built the A-frame, they were all up here every weekend, and besides Donna and Jake and Joe, and they came, and without them we would have had nothing.
And then you built the lodge.
And we started the lodge.
What year did you start the lodge?
In '89 we started the lodge, and we opened it in '91.
And you had a heart attack in between?
'89 we had a heart attack, right after we poured the concrete.
Uh-huh. And I can remember you in the back room of the old cabin and resting, and your buddies going out to retrieve the game because the doctor didn't want you doing.
Yeah, well, and Bernice's two brothers, John and Leo, came that hunting season, and they packed out a lot of the game in '89 because I couldn't go out.
What about wildlife? When you were a child, what kind of animals lived here?
Oh, well, we had very few elk. That's kind of an interesting story. My dad and I and the camp tender were heading up to Black Butte. The camp tender was a man that serviced a number of ranchers' sheep camps. He would move their tents and haul supplies in where they had to be packed in and that. And my dad and him and I were on the wagon. We're going up with team and wagon, and somewhere going up there, they spotted some elk, and we crawled out, looked over a hill, and there was 20 or 30 elk there. And I remember they were so excited. That was the biggest herd of elk they'd ever seen, and they were all those elk, and it was just a very small herd. Now we wouldn't even think of them. But there was no elk hardly here, and they gradually got to be more elk in later years, but nothing until late in the '60s when they stopped shooting spike bulls. And then the elk herd really grew because the few cows that were here weren't getting bred. You'd see 50 cows and no calves with them, or 1 or 2 calves. And that's when they stopped shooting the spike bulls. That was really built the elk herd here.
Were there any antelope?
Oh yeah, there was some antelope.
And mule deer?
We had lots and lots of mule deer. And I remember after the war, when they put 1080 here, and as a poison, they injected the horses with 1080, and then they dropped the quarters of the horses out over all the hills, and everything that ate to the wolves, the lions, everything that ate anything on there, including the birds and the eagles. It was a terrible thing, but it killed off all the predators. And then the deer herd exploded. We had deer, and then they had to start putting in claims because they ruined the hay. The deer would get up on top of the haystacks, and then they'd pee all over the haystacks, and the stock wouldn't eat them. They'd ruin way more hay than they ever ate. And then they gave us big high fences to put around our haystacks, protected. And there was a 2 deer area, and everybody got two deer to shoot. But there was still very few elk.
And whitetail, was it mainly mule deer? growing?
There were, whitetail didn't come in. It was the 60s or 70s. I remember when whitetails first showed up down around Whitehall. And they were new to Whitehall area, and they gradually moved up the valley. And it was quite a while before they got up here to move.
Well, it was, when you first started the business, your hunters were all unguided. They did their own thing. Did they hunt mainly elk or deer or a combination of both?
They were, I told them to hunt elk. And I said, don't even worry about deer. Sometime in the week you'll run across a nice big buck and take him when you see him. And they all went home, everybody, pretty near 100%, went home with a nice big buck deer. There was that many deer here. And, and there were a few elk, but they got a few elk.
What happened in all the hard work? I mean, every nail you guys have put into every
Well,
building.
what happened, we got a young man to stay to watch the place and feed the horses, but he found a girlfriend, and then he left between Christmas and New Year's. And we came up, and the pipes were froze in the A-frame, and Dad, we thought them out, and then at the end of the day, he said, we got to get somebody up here to watch the place and feed the horses. And I said, who are we going to get? He looks at me and he said, what?
I didn't say, whatever you say.
You said the one that isn't working right now. And so that was me. And so then the following week I had to stay because once we started the lodge, things would disappear. And so then I had to stay here. First I cried, but I grew up on a farm, so I was used to the country. And then pretty soon I couldn't wait for them all to leave, so I could do my own thing.
So you were alone up here, and you
Yes,
had to go out in the field to feed the horses?
yes. And sometimes I only had a tractor to drive.
And
Yeah.
so there was no way for you to get to town?
No, no.
How did you communicate at that time?
Well, I wouldn't stay until he put the phone in. And then we had the phone, and then every day at 9 o'clock, he would call. So I had to make sure I was in the house. And
Was that 9 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock?
9 o'clock in the morning, and then he'd call at night again, yeah. And so then, but then people started driving in when I was alone, and there was an old trapper, his name was Ray Jones, and he lived up
Ledford Creek.
Ledford, and he would come and get water here, him and his wife, once a week. And I told him, I said, when I go out, they take off. And he said, well, do you have a scope? Do you have binoculars? No. Do you have a scope? No. What do you have? I've got the 30-06 and my pistol. And so he said, well, let's mount it. And so he made a little makeshift table in the dining room and mounted it. And so he said, get their license number. So they drive in, I'd get their license number. When I'd open the door, they would take off. And so pretty soon down at Chicks, they said, there's a crazy lady living up there. And so old Ray said to me, should I tell him you're not crazy? I says, no, let them think I'm crazy, then they don't come. So that took care of the people driving in. Not only did they just drive in for snoopiness, but they dropped off cats, little kittens that they didn't want. So one time we had 32 little kittens. And of course they grew. And so then Bob Beer, who was the head of Snowcrest, the manager, he would every once in a while check in on me and see if I was alive. And then I said, Bob, we're just overrun with cats. And so he said, we can't keep cats. I said, how many do you want? He said, how many can you give me? So we had a little Ford Ranger. So I started feeding those cats in the Ford Ranger topper. We had those. And so then one morning I called Bob. I said, Bob, I've got cats. How many? I don't know. So I took him down, which was the first ranch. There was a great big barn there. It was no longer there. And he said, I'll meet you at the barn. So he said, I have no food. So I said, I'll bring you some food. So I put out the cat food, and then we opened up the topper, and they shot out like a cartoon. It was funny. And Ted Turner bought Snowcrest. And he said, when he left, Bob said, we still have cats.
And during the week, I mean, you kept very busy. And so Dad, you would come on the weekend with?
Well, when we were building, yeah, it's like Jake was doing most of the plumbing on it. And Tom Cashel, who was a master electrician, and I was his flunky, we did the electrical. Tom wasn't too well, and so he would line me out and look over my shoulder, make sure I did it right. And I was doing electrical. And Bernice insulated most of it with that fiberglass insulation, that itchy, terrible stuff. And she did that. And then when we started putting up sheetrock, we'd come up on weekends and we'd slap up as much sheetrock as we could, and we put in 4 screws and marked the studs on each piece. And then she had an old baseboard heater she could plug in, and she drug that from one room to another in the lot, and she screwed all that sheetrock to the walls all week. And then we come back and slap up a bunch more, and then she would screw that all to the wall the next week until we got it all sheetrocked. And then her and her brother Tony was off work, and he came out and they put up all the tongue and groove in the front room and the hallways and everything. And she set every screw, run through every nail in that. She'd set every nail, and Tony was cutting the boards, and she was putting them in, and they did the whole. Her and Tony did all of that.
How many years were you up here alone in the winter?
4.5 years before your dad retired.
Mm-hmm.
And you worked hard?
Yeah, didn't have
yourself.
And then in 91, Carl and Bart moved up there, up at the Blue Roof, and so then they would come and visit.
Did you get lonely?
No, there was too much to do. Mm-hmm. And so, and then when they came on weekends, I had to cook for the crew. You know, so.
You would send Dad a grocery list?
Yes, I'd call him up, and then he would go and bring the groceries.
And one time you were feeding the horses and you got hurt and you were all by yourself.
We had this old truck, and I had to feed the horses. And I ran out of gas. And so I walked up back to the cabin, no gas. And so then I have to cover the hay because the horses will eat the hay. I couldn't find a tarp. So I took irrigation dams. And the wind was blowing, and as I was holding the irrigation, they have a great big board on one end, the wind took me down off the truck. And when I came to, I had 2 dogs cuddled next to me, and the horses were around in a circle. And so then I still had to cover the hay because the horses would eat the hay. So I climbed back up and had to cover the hay. And then I made my way up to the house or the lodge, and we had a whirlpool, and I laid in there, and
What did you tell Dad when he called at 9 o'clock that night?
no, that was on a Friday, so he was on his way up. One look at me, he said, "What happened?" "Nothing." So eventually I had to confess that I had the 2 dogs, and those dogs were so different when I was alone than when other people were around. And Cindy did not like the men. She must have been abused. She was a sheltered dog. And so she would sit between my legs, and if a man wanted to shake hands, she'd growl at him. And so then I would have to, if I wanted to do business, I had to put Cindy away. So yeah, and I could talk to the men.
Were you ever scared or afraid being alone up here?
A couple of times, yes. Once at the old cabin, I had the dogs in, and they were growling and wanted to get out the door. And I had a nightlight, and I ran into the back room to get the gun. And so I went and got the gun, and they could see me through the window. And so the next thing I heard was a door slamming and a car taking off. Yeah, so that was one of the times. Yeah.
So at what point did the both of you finally say, this may have been a good idea, this just might work?
You mean?
The business.
Well, it was just a matter of, I just wanted to, it was the good Lord looking after us and dumb luck. I didn't have any idea that the business would do what it would do. All I wanted is a little something to supplement my Social Security. And I had no idea on all this or what the potential was and that. You just take what the good Lord gives you and you just keep going.
But then it snowballed.
Yeah.
It got too much because we couldn't afford to hire all the help you have. And so there was just hunting in the summertime, you and the kids would come, and Missy and Kelsey, and then you'd leave, and then hunting season, my friend Betty would come up and help cook, and we would cook for 30 plus people, and I would make all the desserts and make rolls every other day, plus housekeeping every day. And so the customers used to think she was his wife instead of me. And so I just let him think that. You know, so I was just the maid.
Oh, you were much more than that. It was just you and Betty.
Yes.
So at 3 o'clock in the morning, Betty and you, would you get up and cook breakfast?
Yes. But during hunting season, I would stay up. We feed the people that were in. And then the people that would stay up till 9:30 at night, when they come in, I feed them. Then I would have to clean up and hurry up and set the table. And by that time, sometimes 12 o'clock, before I got to bed, and at 3 o'clock you have to get up and start breakfast. So I would run out, start the coffee, run back in the room and get dressed, and then we'd start breakfast. So one week there was a customer. At the end of the week, when he was paying his bill, he said to me, "I watched you all week long run out and turn the coffee on, and 3 minutes later you were coming out all dressed and in the kitchen." And then my friend Betty would come up, and she would help with breakfast, and she'd go lay down. But I never could sleep after I was up once. So
In the hunting season, you
I
always lost weight?
I did. I lost over 20 pounds every hunting season.
And how about sleep?
Well, sometimes 3 hours, 4 hours a night. And so then one year I put on the recording, "Thank God hunting season's over with," and your dad called and didn't get me, and he heard the recording, and he's called until I answered the phone, "Get that off of there."
Well, I bet you were exhausted.
I was happy hunting season was over with. Yes.
And what would be the most rewarding thing about starting the business?
I don't know. I think to see where it's going to and where it's going to go from now on. There's so much good is going to be on from now on that we have no idea where it's going to grow, and that's it's going to be the best thing.
Do you have any regrets?
Oh, I don't know. If we had any regrets, what you can't regret anything. You just gotta take it as it goes. You gotta
What
just.
was rewarding for you?
To see you make the business what it is. And then now Cassie going a step further. And from then on, who knows, the next person will maybe go further.
If you could paint a picture of 100 years from now, what would you like to see?
The Lord's got that plan, not me.
Mom?
That it stays in the family forever. And I think it's pretty well fixed that it will stay. And so between you and Joe, yeah, so.
No pressure,
No pressure at all.
no pressure.
You know, Dad thought he had a perfect plan, and that didn't work. We think we have a plan. We hope it works.
It has to work.
Can you think of any advice you'd like to give somebody going into the future?
I don't know. I'd be real skeptical of any advice I'd give. You know, I don't.
How about from past lessons you learned?
I don't know.
I'd like to say something. I don't think you should be skeptical. He taught us we can do anything.
Yeah. You use your heart, and you showed us heart, determination, and never give up. And here we are today. Many challenges later, and especially you two, the challenges you faced, Grandma and Grandpa faced, you paved the way to make a future for many family members to come.
Only is if you got something needs to be done, you can do it. If you figure it out and put yourself to it. You may do it the hard way and the wrong way, but you can accomplish anything if you don't let yourself get put down. You can do it. Take on any challenge and you can beat it. But you look back and the way you did it sometimes, it sure wasn't the best way. It could have been done a lot better differently, but you got the job done.
Well, Dad, that night in the bar when you decided to go ask this young woman to dance.
She didn't know what she was getting into.
She certainly did. It's been quite the dance. Yeah. Some pretty tough bloodlines, strong people. Yeah, strong women, strong men.
Well, you guys come from good stock.
I don't know about that.
I guess that's my cue. What was the vision and the idea of bringing Grandpa and Grandma together to help share their story and their legacy?
Go ahead, Joe.
For me, it was so future generations don't have to go through what Donna and I had to go through, to know what this land means. And so it stays in the family. And the pain that it hurt my dad was terrible. And I don't want to see anybody have that. So I hope that that portrays through what was done here today. So, you know, say your kids or your kids' kids will go, hey, this is important. Let's not be greedy over something. Let's make it work. So Donna and I have done stuff that people, I don't know, when I visit about it, they go, I can't believe you guys can do that. We work together on separating the land to keep it in two different families, to try to keep it in one family, if that makes sense. You know, that way there's Donna's family, there's my family. So if A family doesn't hurt B family, you know, try to keep it together. And that's the sole reason why we did it. So when people go, why in the world did they separate? They must have been hating each other. Far from the truth. We did it, you know, water rights. You know, why separate the water rights? Because that would be a huge pain. Donna just keep the water rights, you know, in her name, because she's down here mainly. I'm up the hill looking down at her, making sure she does good. But other than that, it's just, let's make sure people know how important it is.
So for me, the goal is to help preserve the land for future generations, and Joe and I work together to try to make that happen. So if one family wants to sell, they have to offer it to the other family in order to do it, and so that we can try to keep it going for years to come. And I think it's really important that not only us and our children, our grandchildren, and future generations, we remember that this land was a gift. And we only own the part that we put our blood, sweat, and tears into. And it's the heritage we want to pass down. The land was given to us by people who worked extremely hard. And no one would understand that if we didn't take days like today to record it, to let people know the value is not in the monetary value. The value is in the heritage, and how do you preserve that heritage? And sitting here today and listening to Grandma and Grandpa and their stories and their questions, I mean, it's beyond doubt their love for the land and what the land has done, not only for them, but for the family, but for people who walk through the door. And there's really a healing value to it all. And so as times change, our dream does not have to become somebody else's dream, but they can make their own dreams here on the land.
I just want you guys each to take a moment and explain your upbringing and the point of view from your guys' side, being raised by Grandma and Grandpa.
And you better did your chores.
Oh boy.
Yeah, you better did what you were asked to do, and you better do it right. You know, Grandma was perfectionist.
If your drawers, your socks weren't right, your underwear weren't right, in one drawer, your whole dresser was on your bed. So you were raised to do things right. No. And we were raised to, take on anything. The stuff that we've done up here, and like Dad said, a few times, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we'll figure it out and do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did. We didn't have a clue, but we did. And that's how we were taught.
Yeah, there were a lot of challenges, and Joe and I we were 4 years apart, so when we were younger, that was a big difference, but once we grew up in our 20s, it really didn't matter. But I always remember playing and doing things, and we were outdoors. I mean, Mom and Dad had work to do, and we left in the morning, and we better be home at dinner. And we would climb to the top of the mountain, and couldn't saddle horses, but we could ride. We were a heck of a good rider because we could ride bareback. And we could climb up on the fence and climb on the horses and run full blast. And Joe would whip the bridle off my horse, and I'd be there with no control whatsoever. And it's amazing. We lived through some of the adventures we did. And go ahead.
I was going to say, like Donna mentions, I learned to tell time because I knew we had a wristwatch on. We could be anywhere we wanted to be on this side of the river when we were kids. We had to be back at 12 o'clock and not 12:01 and 5 o'clock.
Wow.
And you weren't late. And that's probably why my knees are shot. I have ran down these hills to make sure I was home on time. Dead ass run down some of these steep hills.
Yeah. But Mom and Dad we would leave Butte Friday night, and they would load us up in the trucks Sunday afternoon, and we had to be home in time to go to 7 o'clock Mass at St. Anne's Church. And I often would be sitting there wondering why we hurried home as I looked over at Mom and Dad dozing off in the pew. And but they were strict, and as long as we were honest and did what we were asked, we pretty much had free run of whatever we wanted to do. When we got older, we would have competitions on hiking into the mountain, and with nothing but our rifle, some extra clothes, a little bit of food, and who could survive the best overnight.
Yeah.
And we would see who could make the best shelters. I became very good at making shelters. Joe became very good at starting forest fires to stay warm.
I was going to be warm. Yeah, I mean, and it helped both of us to stay out in the mountains overnight is nothing, because we grew up doing it.
Yeah,
It was a lot of fun too.
yeah.
Could you touch a little more specifically on in the 80s, early 80s, when Grandpa and Grandma started to establish the ranch, and what role you guys played, if there was a role, and specifically helping out with that start, working on the ranch, helping out elsewhere, and so on?
Yeah. Well, Joe lived here for a while, and then he joined the military, and so you were gone some during the 80s, and Jake and I were just married, and Will was just a baby, and Mom and Dad were getting this business going, and they needed help with every building. I mean, you just knew you were going to come up and work, and Joe did it whenever he could. And then Jake and I were doing a lot to help them. And they, like Dad said, they weren't doing anything in the summer. And so during the summer, we started offering horseback rides. I knew horses. I rode horses my whole life. And the movie River Runs Through It comes out. Fly fishing to me was going out in the field, kicking over a big horse turd, finding the biggest worm I could find, putting it on the hook and going fishing. Well, I knew I couldn't make money that way. And so I learned how to fly fish. Didn't even know if I was going to like it, but I knew I had to be able to talk the talk. And soon I loved the sport. And so it grew from hunting to horses to fly fishing. And now today, where we do military trainings, and Cassie has a nonprofit business that she runs out of here for trauma and a lot of PTSD work that she does with the military. So, so it all started out, you just wanted to help, and it turned into a love and a desire. And Joe, I mean, you can tell your own story, but when you came back, you became involved. And
Oh yeah, you would come up here, you didn't know if you were going to be sheetrocking, helping Jake plumb, helping with electrical, but you were working. You were always doing something. Kelsey learned to walk up here. Will learned to walk up here, because this is where we were. We came up, travel all the way from Missoula every weekend, turn around, drive back on Sunday night. That's what we did. And these guys lived in East Helena, and they came every single weekend. And it's amazing in 2 days the work that we would do up here and get things done. Because everything you got done that day, you didn't have to do the next weekend. Yeah. And we had fun too.
oh, we had a blast.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't all work. There, I know, helping a guy by the name of Terry, mud and taping. And I do know there was some mud thrown around a few times. Yeah, and we had fun. And I do remember going back to when we were kids. If we were really good, there was a place between Luray and Sheridan. It was a round stagecoach, and we could stop and get an ice cream cone. If we were really good, we got 2.
We didn't get much ice cream.
No.
Yeah, but then we were fortunate because Grandma was up here, and so we would come and spend the summers with Grandma. And Joe would let Kelsey and Missy come. So Kelsey and Missy and Cassie and Will spent most of all their childhood up here. And even when you were first born, Kaiden, you spent a lot of your first years riding on old Dutches and hanging out here at the ranch. Yeah.
Could you walk us through the transition, maybe this is a little more directed towards you, Nana, from when you and Jake started to take over the business, and what your vision was, if you felt like you had big shoes to fill, how that transition went, maybe some hard times. Just walk us through that a little bit.
You know, change is difficult. Change is always the unknown. And Grandma and Grandpa started the business, and we didn't want to come in and take over. We wanted to come in and work with them. We had different ideas. Dad started the business to take care of the blue-collar man, the unguided guy. And he was looking for a place for them to hunt. And a lot of our business was unguided. Then we started to get into the guided industry, grew it into the summer industry, and the business started to grow. And Grandma and Grandpa, thank goodness they never quite believed in retirement, and they would always come down and help us out. And they would always come down and give a helping hand when needed. And for years, Grandpa, even today at 90 years old, he is up and down those hills spraying weeds. So I don't know if it ever quite transitions out, but you transition with, and that's what they did. And no, it wasn't always easy. I mean, your family, and there's going to be ups and downs and disagreements and what about this or what about that, but respecting each other's opinion and respecting that we all have the same goal in mind, we can make it over those tough discussions and move on and make the business better. So it was always a lot of work, still is a lot of work, and there's always changing times. And I think as far as changing times go, you have to change too. And Mom and Dad were pretty brave to go with some of the ideas that we went with. Yeah.
Taking that same approach, not necessarily a transition, but transitioning with into the generation of Cassie and Freddie, Eli and Ollie, so on and so forth, your children, your grandchildren, and hopefully more generations to come. What advice would you have to them to continue this legacy and to keep this operation grounded in family?
You know, the business is one thing, and if it can be a business, that's great. But to keep the land and the heritage, that's really the most important thing. The business allowed us to live on the land. And as things change and as times change, maybe it will become a different type of business. But if people can live on the land and take care of the land, and the business makes that happen, then that would be the goal. That would be what the future would hold.
I think I would love it to know in 200 years this is still in the Tate family, or however it is, but still like in some sort of bloodline. The stuff that we do it, and that, you know, I think if a person just remembers greed's evil, stay away from greed, because we went through that to get to where we're at here, dealing with a terrible situation, but we did it, and we made it, and now we're here. So I hope that wouldn't happen, you know. Hope these people stop and, you know, said, hey, we can get so much money if we sell this. Let's not worry about this person or this person, you know, or this family member or that family member. Let's sell it. You know, let's force them to sell. Let's do something. If that can be stayed away from, I think then we're hugely successful. Mm-hmm. If this helps, wow, you know.
Right. Like yeah. Ted Turner sent down some men to visit with Dad. And if we can keep this in mind as we go forward, these gentlemen come in, they sit down, of course Grandpa invites them for coffee, and they're sitting there, and they say, Mr. Tate, we would like to buy your property. Mr. Turner would like to buy your property. And Dad says, he doesn't have enough money. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I have a house that I'm working on. I hope that house stands for quite a few years. I overbuilt it a little bit. Boy, but I think that would be great. I go in there, retire. One of my grandkids goes, oh, hey, I know where I can go to retire, you know. You know, I'll be long gone and dead, but, you know, hopefully the house is still standing and there's places, you know, that they know they can come to, you know. That'd be great.
Yeah. And we have to be realistic. All we can do is hope. I mean, and everybody, as the future generations go forward, don't let the land or the different ideas divide the family, because the family is more important than anything. So, yeah.
Yeah, we're proof. Donna and I work very good together on this. I mean, the lawyer, I don't know how many times he complimented us on this. You know, so doing what we did was a huge undertaking just to try to keep it for you guys.
Yeah. But I think the goal of the whole thing was to help preserve the family heritage. And it so amazes me, like what my grandma's seen in 100 years, and the tough woman she was, especially for the 1940s, to be as not sell this, and then for my mom to stay up here alone. I mean, there's some tough women in our family, and I kind of think I'm a little tough, but
I got scars to prove it.
yeah. But I mean, and a lot of it is we just want to prevail. We just want to do what's right. And man, oh man, I can't even imagine the changes what my grandma's seen in her life, to even my dad at 90 years old now. And what in another 40 years, what you and I'll see, you know. So it would be interesting, Kaiden, at some point we're 90 and you redo this and see what we have to say back then, or then in the forward.
And this land is something. A guy that I work with really brought it to my attention. I didn't even think about it. He said, people come from all over the world to see this area. Rich people, they can go anywhere, but they come here.
You're a big baby.
I am. You know, that's something, you know?
Yeah,
When you
it
think about it, they can go anywhere they want. They come here.
Year after year after year. Yeah. Yeah. You know, growing up here and living here, and we were very fortunate. We were close to my grandma, so we got to hear stories from the very beginning. And so we had, of all our cousins and everybody, Joe and I were probably the most blessed as far as being able to spend so much time hearing about the families and the family stories. So we had the advantage of having more of a connection. In our whole childhood, we grew up here, and we knew the land. We knew it inside and out. We picked rocks. We moved irrigation dams. And so that installed a value in the property, a value in the heritage, a value in why we were here. Had Joe and I know that we had to come up with something to preserve that love or that heritage. And so Joe and I decided, now we were sole owners, him and I, to split the land. And by splitting the land, he has half, I have half. And then if our families, no one can take from the other, but one can give to the other. And that's how we have it set up. So if one part of the family no longer had an interest in the land, they could sell to the other part of the family. In the heritage and looking forward, if we can keep that alive without letting a divide come, like happened to us, that would be our goal. Is not let, it's not that the land causes the family divide, it's the greed that can cause the family divide. And if we can stay away from that, and if it stays another 10 years, 100 years, 200 years, all the better. Maybe we have a huge wish that can never come true, but if we don't try, it won't. Yeah. When Grandpa came here in 1910 to today, of the 5 generations, 4 of those 5 generations are currently alive on the ranch. All right.
All right.